What's up, everybody? My name is Jacob Hardison, and today, let's talk rear shock mounting location. Welcome back, of course, to another tuning video here on the Adrenaline RC channel, where we are just breaking the edge of going through our different shock tuning adjustments. Last week, we of course went over our front shock mounting locations. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely make sure at the end of this video, you go back, look at that. That way you know what our rear locations do and our front locations, and you have the full picture so you know what to do when you're at the track. So just like always, we'll go ahead, we'll bring you guys closer to this rear end. That way we can get that little bit of visual aspect to it, and we'll go over what the different options are, what they're going to do, and when to use them. All right, so here we are looking at the lovely rear end of my buggy. And of course, just like last week, I went ahead, pulled this shock off, took the standoff out, and that way we can see what's going on a little bit more with our different options. So the first thing we're gonna go over, of course, is what options we have. Then we'll kind of talk about just what the general idea of leaning or standing the shocks will do. And then we'll talk more in depth about what specifically moving on the tower will do and what specifically moving on the arm will do. So as we can see on this particular car, I've got 4 options on top and 3 on the bottom. Just like every other tuning adjustment, some have more, some have less. But generally speaking, you'll have some sort of straight line. Well, I guess not really straight, it's kind of diagonal upwards, but a straight diagonal line upwards of different options up here. And then down here, you'll have a couple different just arm options. Very quickly to go over that. Now to jump into our tuning options here, we'll first talk about our tower, and then we'll go ahead and talk about our arms. So to start off with the tower here, we'll go over our outer holes first, and then we'll go over our inner holes. So on the outer holes, what you're gonna notice is you're, of course, standing the shock up. So we'll start with that. You're gonna have less mid-corner grip. You'll have more traction into the corner, and it's gonna square up better on exit. Now, the reason for that is, especially in that mid-corner area, as the car starts to lean into the turn, because the shock is more stood up, it's going to get stiffer as you're pivoting. And because it's getting stiffer, you're going to make it feel a little bit more responsive because it's not going to be able to hold grip nearly as well. And then coming out of the turn, because it's more stood up and you're in that more front to back area, you're transferring weight more straight lined. That is going to mean that more weight is going to come onto the rear of the vehicle, which is going to allow it to have more traction, which means you'll have, in theory, more acceleration as you come out of the turn. But to just give a quick overview, that stood up shock, again, is going to be more grippy kind of in and out, but in the mid-corner area, because it's not going to be able to roll on that outside tire as easily, it's going to feel more responsive, and it's going to want to break traction a little bit more. Now, as we go to our inner holes, so we go into here, we start leaning our shock more. That is going to have more steering into the corner, and it's going to have more mid-corner grip. So to go back to what I was telling you with the shock stood up, now the shock is laid down. As it comes through the turn, it starts to transfer that weight, that outside shock. Let's say this is our inside, this is our outside. That outside shock is going to, I don't know the best way to describe it, but it's going to become softer because it's going to be able to kind of squish into it a little bit more. I don't have like a great way to kind of describe it, but it's kind of leaning onto the shock, making it get softer as you go through the turn. So you're going to have more of that mid-corner grip, and it's going to be a little bit more stable, comparatively speaking. But now that you have more side-to-side traction, your front-to-back traction will then go away a little bit in comparison. So you won't have as much of that square up kind of accelerating feel coming out of the turn. Now to go ahead and talk about our lower holes here on our rear arm, we'll talk about the outside ones first. So again, continuing to lean that shock more. That is going to have more stability and more lateral grip, so more side-to-side grip. Just like I was saying, when you lean in the top, as you go into the turn, it'll get softer progressively through the turn. That is going to have more grip, so it's going to feel more stable. It's not going to feel quite so skatey or choppy per se. Now, the problem though is that on your front to back end of things, it's not gonna be able to soak up bumps nearly as well. So definitely gonna be more of a smoother track or a higher bite track compared to a bumpy or looser track, which then brings us to our inside hole here. That is going to be better for the bumps and jumps. But just like as we stood the tower up on stood the shock up on the tower, you are going to lose side bite because it's not going to be able to lean and soak in that outside end of things. So it's gonna be better on the bumps and jumps, especially on your front to back end of things, less side bite. And again, because the shock is more stood up, it's gonna be able to squat a little bit more coming out of the turn, which means that you will get more exit traction. So just as a kind of quick recap of everything, the more you lean the shocks in, the more stable it's gonna be, especially on a smoother, higher bite track. It doesn't need to do as much of the front to back bump soaking. And as you stand the shock up more, you're gonna get a more responsive car in the turn in that mid area, but you'll have more traction as you go to that first 25% of the turn, and you'll have more grip coming out of the turn. Now, as you make some of these changes, potentially, especially if you make a very dramatic change, as you go and you lean the shock a ton, you might need to go to a softer spring. And as you bring the shock more stood up, you might need to go to a stiffer spring. That is going to, of course, depend track to track. It's gonna depend on how aggressive of a change you're making, but it is something to look out for as you make those changes. If you're making a minor change, then I wouldn't worry too much about doing that spring. I would worry more, of course, about resetting your ride height. Go out, drive it, and see how it feels. And then to end off here, let's say you move inside and inside. So you're keeping the shock in the same kind of angle, but you're moving it further in. The more narrow car or more narrow shock setup, of course, is going to be more reactive side to side. It's gonna be able to roll a little bit more. And as you make those shocks come out wider, so you move both the tower out and the arm out, a wider stance, of course, is going to be more stable. So that will go over all of our different tuning options. I hope this has been helpful for you. And definitely, if there's anything that I missed, anything you want me to go over further in depth, or maybe you just want it in writing, definitely leave a comment down below and I will certainly get back to you. That way you have all the information you need. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you guys in the next one for an all new tuning video.